All right, today we're taking a look at the commander. Okay, now this is the one of the more one of the pieces that comes across even more comic book stylish. Um, but just to add, uh, actually, my aesthetic is not to actually create comic book style. It is the final result that winds up communicating in a very similar way to like a comic book pinup would. And the reason, so let me just break that down real fast. Just as I said in the other video about how I start with the line work first, and let's just take a look at her line work. And what I mean by line work, I don't mean pencils. So for those who haven't seen the other videos, right? So I don't mean pencils. I'll just go all the way down through here, sorry. Right? So this is how it actually starts. It starts like this. So it's not a situation where I'm penciling in. Let's say I'm just going to do a little as an example, right? For those who haven't seen the other vids. Yeah. So if I was penciling, let's say if I was penciling, right? Now drawing a character or something like that. And I'm penciling, right? And obviously this would be the beginning stages, and I'm going to be defining eventually and stuff, right? But let's say I'm penciling. I'll just give her some kind of hair of some sort. Just messing around. Let's make it a little bit larger for everybody to see. Just messing around, okay? So let's say, and I'm doing this, right? So we see it's a person, since we're uh, talking a lot about my baby dolly kind of style lately, right? So let's just say it starts off like this, all right? And let's say whatever that line work is, then we're going to be we're going to be inking over it, right? And my ink is, how's my ink? And we're going to be inking over it. Now I'm not an inker, right? But and then after you have your line work and all your layers of pencils, or if you're just trying to be traditional, you have one layer of pencil, then you have a nice clean layer where you can start doing your ink work in and stuff like that, right? And you're blocking in and you're doing your ink and you're doing your whatever cross hatching or whatever you're doing to create shading and turning form and stuff like that, and you're going over your work. That is right. So this is the traditional approach for comic book style, right? Pencils, and then somebody inks it over, right? And then once you have the inked over, then it goes through the coloring stages. Okay, that's not how I approach. Right? That's not even my intent. Right? So my approach is I go initially with what you would call ink. Okay, what an ink would what's like a sumi brush. I initially go in as this. There's no pencils. There's nothing else. And you see in the time lapse videos, there's very little erasing. It's more like I'm constructing the form with ink. Okay, so and I'm building from the actual shadow, as I said before. I'm building from the actual shadow. Right. This is important to note. So this is not done after this is not done after the fact. Judging the model in there, it's literally grown from the shadow, grown from the shading, or grown from the shadow based on how I'm interpreting the ink lines, right, or the line work, right, and I'm building and constructing. That's why it's very loose, but it's now my aesthetic. It's now my style, because the looseness, the slightly blurred what do you want to call it, negative spaces, because where I erased a little bit or something like that. All this stuff is consistent across like the whole entire collection of work that I have like this. So it's now become my style. But it's not a style I'm trying to do. It's just literally how it comes out, and it just keeps on coming out like that, coming out like that, coming out. So all of this is done first. All of this is done first, right? So there's no pencils. That was the other thing too. The reason why I even got to this point, is whenever I would ink over or even outline a little bit, contour outline a little bit, a pencil drawing that I would do, I always personally felt that I was losing the drawing. So, for instance, if I always bring up like Jim Lee, because Jim Lee did the icon, right? And he was, I was a big fan of his art when they started Image Comics and stuff, right? Back in the 90s. But for instance, first like that, if you look at Jim Lee's pencils, and his pencils are like, have a whole life of their own. Matter of fact, when you look at his pencil, you're like, whoa, that's what the real Jim Lee drawing looks like, because it can be interpreted very differently versus versus who inks it. If it's Scott Williams who inks it, it's going to go to another level, right? But if it's others who are not like Scott Williams who ink it, it may deaden what Jim actually designed. Now the illustration may be great, page may be fabulous, but when you look at his original pencils, you're like, whoa, now that's Jim Lee, because there's something about the authenticity of the original pencil. So whenever I would ink over my, or even begin to outline or do anything to my original drawing, I always felt I could feel I was losing the original intent. Even though the ink may be looking better, right? Or if I had somebody else ink it for me, and I'm like, yeah, that looks even better. But somehow my original intent winds up getting lost. So since I'm doing this all my own, right? I started not with this, but when I started doing the heavy line with the mechanicals, I just started to approach every drawing like that. And eventually it went into my figurative drawings. And so that's what you wind up having. You have my heavy lines, or my heavy drawing, but I guess I call it heavy drawing because I do it for my mechanical units. Now you have now you have the heavy drawing with me doing figurative work, right? Or dynamic figurative work. And so this winds up being the result, because the heavy drawing, automatically you're working with the shadows, automatically from the very beginning. You got to work a little bit lighter though when doing the figurative stuff, because there's more things that need to be defined. So you just can't go in. Let's say with a, well, I guess you could, right? But I wouldn't recommend it. You could, whenever I go in with it, I don't necessarily go, when I do mechanicals, I go in with a real heavy line like that. I go in real heavy, right? But when I'm doing figurative, like Andromeda or the Commander or several other ones, I go in with a slightly thinner line, so I can do a little more construction in the beginning processes. So it's not, so I can actually see the form, right? You see, this is my default baby doll pose. I always wind up doing it. So I can see the form, and I can still hold on to a lot of the line work and everything like that, but I need to be able to see. In other words, when I'm doing mechanical stuff, it's very blocked in, right? So if I'm doing a droid-like thing, it's like this, right? This is what I did in the other drawing, right? Something like that, right? Like that, and then we can block it in. They're very simple. It's a mechanical unit. No matter how many parts it has, it starts off with an overall simple shape. But the human form is way more complex. So I can't go in such a heavy line. So the line has to, so like, this would be very heavy, very thick. But what I'm doing, but just that thickness can only be, this would be like for the head of a person. In other words, whatever, even if I can go heavy like this with a mechanical unit, when I'm doing a person, that line needs to be a lot smaller, a lot thinner, right? So I can actually begin to design out the form, right? And I'm not doing, and whenever I do, when I do my line work, I don't do it in layers. Or when I do my heavy drawing, it's all in one layer. So there's no multiple layers. There's no whole bunch of erasing. As you already saw, I'll do stuff like, I'll grab areas like this, right? And then, I'll just move stuff into position, right? Because the heavy drawing style for me allows me to be able to create, create gestures of form that work for me, or that are logical. So I'm able to go like this with my arm. Now this also matters a little bit, right? Because anybody who's trained traditionally we've always worked on at least 18 by 24 size paper, right? This is all of like 14 inches or something, right here. So this is kind of small, but it's comic book page size though. But if you're used to doing figurative work, right? Drawing with a model in front of you or something like that, you're used to moving your arm a lot more. So the heavy drawing style works for me more because I can then at least go like this with my arm, right? I can go like that, and I can do bigger sweeping lines and gestures. That matters not that because the line looks cool or something, but it matters when you're trying to capture like, a hip area. You don't want to. You don't when you're when I was, let's say, when I was a little child, when I was like 10, 10 years old, if I was to draw that hip, as an example, if I was to draw this hip, it would be like this. I would go like this, right? And then I would smooth out. Then I would erase and make a better line, type shape or something like that. That's when I started to build anatomy, and then I would start to carve it down, erase it a little bit, and start to create the form because I was blocking stuff in, right? That's like a bit anatomy. And then I start to get into when I started doing like large figure drawing stuff. Then it's the gesture, the sweeping line for the gesture, the sweeping line for the form. And so working with the heavy drawing style allows me to be able to bring that approach to drawing back in, and allows me to actually build from it. Since everything I wind up drawing, instead of just saying, okay, well, this is just part, and let me just go and trace over it. No, my whole thing is, no, I like this. This is a nice shoulder area here, right? What does it mean in relationship to? Here's a nice shoulder area here. Let's say, what does it mean in relationship to, to the rest of the form, and what can I do? Like, so already when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, I see some nice areas here that can turn into, that can possibly turn into some, some aspects of the form that are mechanical or something like that. Like this is a bicep area, there's a tricep area in here somewhere, there's going to be forearm area in here, like that, right? And this is going to be like some kind of ball socket kind of rotator here, something like that, right? Up at the top, some kind of weird rotating thing, and then all I have to do is throw in, it has some kind of structural cover. See, all these things are just going to my mind while I'm doing some kind of structural cover to this section here, right? And then it goes on and on and on and on. Then I can add plating or silhouette of some kind of ribbed plating or something like that, and it starts to work. And then in the end, it's like, oh, that was a pencil. Yeah, I would have shaded that. It's kind of like that. But just want to say that it's not the. I'm looking at the. Like, what is this? It looks like breast to me, and it's not supposed to be. That's weird. Okay. All right. So let's take a look back again at her. Okay. Because in the end, based on you saw me just doing a few second drawing, each drawing, well, it all depends. Because the initial drawing is like 40 minutes. And then I usually come back, then it's another 20 minutes to structure, 20 minutes to structure. I always come back for like 10 to 20 minutes to structure it. But the initial drawing is usually done in 40 minutes. And then everything must be like a cleaned up phase, kind of a thing, right? So that just needs to be understood. I just kind of want to let that know. So even when you see everything, any aspect of it, it's all with this heavy drawing approach. Okay. But it's also a major, obviously major affirmation to dynamic comic book style altogether, because I naturally came about doing this, right, as a faster way of, just as I said, to draw a line, it's a faster way of reading form. Also, I wasn't trying to invest myself in doing long, drawn out images that going towards more believability or realism or anything like that. I wanted it to stay right within the dynamic, fun aspect of what was coming to my intuition and what I was imagining. So these approaches are what help, and in the end, it reads just as fast as I had imagined it. But that also speaks of comic book style. Comic book style reads extremely fast. If you've ever listened to any of my videos on YouTube, you always hear about that, how my mom, had a problem with reading, as an artistic person, of course. So I did everything. I could draw like crazy at 5 years old, but had a hard time reading. And the salesman, anyway, the story goes, the salesman um, told my mom, said, hey, the salesman who was selling like this stuff to help children read, said, all you need to do is buy your son some comic books. When my mom didn't know anything about comic books, she went and bought some anyway, and she would bring them home, and yes, the comic books helped me read. And I was just so fascinated because I could read, I could understand the compositions, I could read all, and then the text just supported the compositions. So it really just says that, and here I am, right to that. And I'm not trying to draw a comic book, but all I'm trying to do is put my ideas out fast and accurate to my initial intuition. And guess what? It winds up using the same visual aesthetics, not the same technical approaches, but the same visual aesthetics wind up playing themselves out, right? This, I drew her a lot backward, right? Oh, and this is her upside down. We've got a few minutes before this thing kicks out. This is just like a study. So like, once again, she should look up. She's standing on the ceiling. Her body, she look at, is collapsing. It's just collapsing towards the ceiling, or that she's pressing on the ceiling. All right. No, I didn't learn anything like that in class. It's just whenever I work upside down, that's why I work upside down. I'm thinking that I'm trying to understand how this thing's flowing, and by looking at it upside down, I can tell, oh, is this thing too buoyant? Does the body look like it's really collapsing on itself? Yeah, and I drew her. Yeah, I drew her this way initially. Right? I wound up with a more simplified hair, but I had a very billowing hair. But I just kept it as it is. I always try to keep whatever line I say, okay, it's true to whatever I was doing. And let's just look at the arm, because this is some of this fun stuff. Now this, like the arm, the mechanical arm stuff, when you look at it real close, it's just a series of line work that I was working on, and I held on to it and I said, hey, that line could be used for this. This line can be used for that, right? So in the end, it all worked out just well. Let me see, can I make this one a little smaller? Yeah, that's a wider one. Yeah, in the end, it worked out just right. So I'll put this in. Right. So hopefully that gives you guys an even better understanding, right? So anyway, I love doing this type of stuff. So you'll be able to see more coming up. Eventually, now I'll get into the actual extremely heavy mechanical units. But it's important to talk about the figurative stuff first, since as you see, this is the epitome of the doll baby style that I always talk about. This is the doll baby. Okay. All right. Thank you for watching.